All right, so hi everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today and welcome to our 8th Orchid US Community Showcase webinar. Before we get started, I just wanted to note a few logistics. You'll notice that your microphone and video are disabled for this session, but please feel free to use the chat to ask questions. You should also see on your Zoom screen that you have the ability to turn on automatically transcribed captions. So please feel free to use that feature on your screen if it's helpful. And this session is being recorded and will be made available to everyone on our public YouTube channel. So please keep an eye out for that link after the session, and closed captions will be included on that recording. All right, so for a quick introduction of who will be speaking on this webinar today, my name is Sheila Rabin, and I am the program leader for persistent identifier communities at Lyrasis, which includes the Orchid US community and the Lyrasis DataSite US community for DOIs. Also speaking on the call today, we have Paolo Guhilde, my colleague at Lyrasis, who is the Orchid US community specialist. We also have Brian Minahan, the engagement lead for global consortia at Orchid. And then we have Bob Scott, Director of Special Projects at the Graduate School at the University of Georgia. Unfortunately, our guest speaker from the University of Pennsylvania, Nikki Agate, was not able to join us today. So on our agenda, we're going to cover a brief overview of Orchid and the Orchid US community, a global overview of Orchid adoption, and then we're going to focus on a relatively new tool called the Orchid Affiliation Manager, which Paolo will introduce. And from there, we'll hear a case study from the University of Georgia about how they're using the Affiliation Manager for grad students. We had planned to hear a case study from University of Pennsylvania about how they're using the tool for faculty. But like I said, Nikki was unable to make it today. And then we should have plenty of time for questions and discussion at the end. So just to make sure everyone is on the same page and to give a brief review, Orchid stands for Open Researcher and Contributor Identifier. And it's really designed to help connect researchers and their research, but also to kind of help streamline workflows that institutions have related to keeping track of your researchers and their activities. So Orchid consists of 3 components: an Orchid ID, which is a unique persistent identifier to distinguish individuals from each other, an Orchid record, which can contain information about a researcher, similar to what you would see on a CV or resume, and then the Orchid API, or Application Programming Interface, which provides technical infrastructure that allows data to be transferred between individuals' Orchid records and institutional systems. So as an example, this is my Orchid ID number up at the top, which links to my Orchid record, which you're seeing kind of a summary of down below. And you can see here that I have information about myself, such as my bio, other names that I've used, my employment and education information, works that I've produced or contributed to, and so on. And I can use my Orchid ID and my Orchid record to distinguish myself and keep track of my activities over time. So Orchid is different from many of the other researcher identifiers because it's not tied to a single institution or platform. It's actually, Orchid is an independent nonprofit organization, and Orchid IDs stay with an individual over the entire course of their career, despite changes in name, institution, career, location, etc. So the Orchid API allows the organizations that I work with, such as research organizations, publishers, funders, it allows these organizations to pull information out of my Orchid record when they need to get information about me and my activities and affiliations. Or they can also use the API to add information or write information to my Orchid record and confirm my relationship with these organizations across the scholarly communication landscape, which also helps me as a researcher and other researchers to keep my Orchid record up to date. So basically, I can enter information in my Orchid record once and then use it again and again to send information to organizations that I work with, or have those organizations add information to my Orchid record for me. So basically, the Orchid API allows organizations to read data from and write data to affiliated researchers' Orchid records with the permission of that researcher. So it's designed to reduce administrative burden in application and reporting processes, and contributes to the integrity of the metadata in this ecosystem. So you can think of Orchid and the Orchid API like a central hub that researchers can use to store and share information about their affiliations and activities with the organizations that they work with. And then those organizations can also feed information back into individuals' Orchid records so that information is authoritative. And because all of this is structured kind of like an ecosystem, it's really important that all stakeholders need to be involved in order for everyone to get the most benefit. And so there are 3 equally important components that are needed to help both the institutions and individual researchers benefit from Orchid. And those are gaining internal stakeholder support at your institution to prioritize Orchid adoption. Number 2 is integrating the Orchid API with local systems that you're using at your organization. And then the 3rd component is doing outreach and education to your researchers so that they know what Orchid is, they know how to get their Orchid ID and how to use their Orchid ID. And that part is really crucial because researchers are central to the Orchid system. So in the US, we have a National Orchid Consortium for nonprofit organizations called the Orchid US Community. And this was formed in January of 2018 when Lyrasis, the Big Ten Academic Alliance, the Northeast Research Libraries, and the Greater Western Library Alliance joined forces to form a national partnership for Orchid membership. And so Lyrasis is the administrative home of this consortium. And at this point, any nonprofit organization can join the Orchid US community as an Orchid member. Your organization does not have to be part of one of these consortia. These are just kind of the founding partners. And our main goals with this consortium are to provide support for a community of practice around Orchid in the US, enabling member institutions to share experience and insight with each other, and make it as easy as possible for institutions to adopt Orchid and make sure that institutions get the most value from their Orchid membership. So we currently have 178 organizational members in the Orchid US community, and this map gives you an idea of where our members are located. And so if your organization is not yet a member of Orchid and you're interested in joining, please do let us know. So now I'm going to hand it over to Brian Minahan, our Orchid representative, to give us a little bit of a global overview and update of what is going on with Orchid across the globe. Go ahead, Brian.
Hi, everyone. Thanks very much, Sheila and Paolo. Thanks for the invitation. My name is Brian Minahan. I'm the engagement lead that works with the US community. I'm mainly work with the member organizations that Sheila mentioned. So those research institutions and in some cases funders and associations or government entities. So here's a picture of Orchid in the US. So that's all of the US. And as you can see, it's quite a large membership. We see this grow pretty, pretty consistently. And there's just really a huge active Orchid community. Sheila and Paolo, as the US community folks, are really some of the most active folks globally. So it's really great to work with them. I highly encourage you to do so if you're just meeting them for the first time. So one thing I'd like to point out on this slide here is the active system integrations. And as I was putting this together, I was just noticing, comparing last showcase, I think y'all did one in January, is that right? So these active system integrations are really a key indicator of more and more organizations interacting with Orchid. And so, so that's grown quite a bit since the last showcase. Next slide, please. Okay, so a overview of the hemisphere. To give you an idea of Orchid beyond the U.S. community, we have, let's see, there's about 5 consortia in the Americas. Chile is our newest one, but the U.S. community, there's also a U.S. government consortia, and Canada are quite active members for quite some time. But also, this map never seems to be right. Okay, Colombia is a rather new consortium. It has really a lot of members, and it's just come about in the last 2-3 years. So I just wanted to point that out, that there's really a lot of activity going on in all parts of the world. Next slide, please. Okay, a bit of statistics for you, and these grow quite a bit from year to year, but 54 countries, we have member organizations. We have 25 consortia around the world. So that's 25 consortia in 24 countries, because the US has 2. And generally these statistics, like affiliations, so that's where a member organization will write an employment or an education, kind of like the CV aspect that Sheila speaks about. That is growing a little bit, but this is part of what relates to what I think Bob will talk about with the University of Georgia's use case and the benefit of universities adding affiliations. Next slide, please. And there we are. Yeah, thanks very much.
Great, thanks, Brian. And now we're going to hand it over to Paolo to give us a bit of an introduction and an overview of the Orchid Affiliation Manager tool.
Thank you, Sheila, and thank you, Brian. Great. So what is Affiliation Manager exactly? So Affiliation Manager is a built-in tool to assert affiliation data to your researchers or anyone that you would like to assert affiliation to. So these affiliations include employment, education and qualifications, invited positions and distinctions, membership, and service. So those are the 7 affiliation data that you can send into an Orchid record. What it does really is that the reason why there's Affiliation Manager is one of the best things that you can do is that it really recognizes your researchers. And of course, it recognizes your organization. A big part of that is because it provides an authoritative data to your researchers. So for example, you want to assert employment to your researcher, the data that you sent that this person works at your institution is an authoritative data. At the same time, it also makes the name of your organization appears consistent on everyone's Orchid record. So, you probably have realized this and have seen this in your Orchid records of your researchers or anyone that where, say, your university's name is different from each other. So there's a little bit of variety into your organizational name. So if you're the one pushing this data, it is much more consistent, and you know what exactly the organizational name it's going to appear as. So with this, as an Orchid US member, you can use Affiliation Manager. It's a really easy tool that you can do. It really does not require developer skills to do this. And then also for this one, to enable Affiliation Manager, you just requires one API key. And also remember that each institution, as a member of an Orchid US community, you actually have access to 5 Orchid API keys. So with Affiliation Manager, you would be using one of those. Next slide. So this is the general workflow of the affiliation manager. So we'll kind of put this into chunks to make it easier for everyone. So step one really for this is that you would be uploading a CSV file to the member portal. With this CSV file, you will have information about the people that you would like to assert data or affiliation data to. So you would have obviously their name, the type of affiliation that you are sending. So it could be employment, education, and the other five affiliation data. And then, of course, if you want to add start date, for example. So those are the things that you can put into a CSV file and upload into the member portal. And then two, with this, basically, you would get permission links. With that permission links, you would send those permission links via email into the researchers or to the individuals that you would like to assert data to. With that, the researchers would be able to either authorize your organization as a trusted party, and then once on step three, for example, once that researcher authorizes the link between their Orchid record or between themselves and the organization, that particular affiliation data will be added into their Orchid record. So it gives them an authoritative information about their employment or education. And then next slide. So this is an example of how it appears on an Orchid record. So the first photo, you can kind of see that the source is Orchid via Orchid member portal. So that means that an affiliation manager was used to provide this data into an Orchid record. So there's a consistency and you can kind of see what exactly the source is. So that's somebody from the organization pushed that data into the Orchid record. The example on the bottom, the second photo, is an example of a manual entry. And this one is actually my employment data in my Orchid record. And you can see that the source is me. So I manually entered that into the system. So now you can kind of see that there's an example of two different sources. And between that one, the organization pushing the data is more authoritative in a way because they basically affirm and that there's more kind of, I guess, authority in a way that this person works at this organization. Next slide. So how can you access or where can you access Affiliation Manager? So the Affiliation Manager is available on the member portal. You can kind of see on the red box, if you go to the top right, there are tools drop-down menu. You will see the different kind of options, and one of them is Affiliation Manager. Now remember, Affiliation Manager needs to be activated using one of your API keys. So if you have not activated it, you will not see that option in the drop-down menu. But if you have, you will see an Affiliation Manager. Now access to the member portal, the organizational owner, which is typically the main voting contact, will need to activate the member portal. If you have not activated this particular member portal, let us know, and we will have Orchid work with you in sending a new link to activate it. The main voting contact, the organizational owner of the member portal, can also add or remove users to the member portal. And of course, they can also change ownership of the member portal. So for example, if you would have as an organizational owner and you prefer somebody else to manage that part of your Orchid membership, you can change that to somebody else. Now to activate the Affiliation Manager, you would have to fill out a form. And there's a link here, and then we will share that with you all later. But the link basically takes you to a form to request a production credential for Affiliation Manager. It's fairly simple. And next slide. And with this, there's also a bunch of resources that you can take a look at. The Affiliation Manager Guide is really sort of like the main one that you want to use. This kind of explains and gives you information almost like a step-by-step kind of way about how to use the Affiliation Manager. And one of the things that you will also find in this Affiliation Manager guide is actually a link to a video. And there's also a link available on this slide. With this link, again, it just kind of takes you to a step-by-step process of uploading and adding affiliation data into your Affiliation Manager to your researchers. And with that, next slide. And with that, I'm going to pass this on to Bob to talk more about what they're doing at University of Georgia.
Thanks, Paolo. Can you hear me okay? Can people hear me?
Sounds good.
Okay.
Yes.
So hello, everyone. Let me share my screen. You should be back where Paolo stopped on the introduction to this section of the presentation. So thanks to Paolo and Sheila for the invitation, and I'm just going to spend a few minutes to tell you about how we've used the Affiliation Manager at the University of Georgia, and in particular for graduate students. So let me say first a little bit about UGA, just to make sure that you don't think the only thing we do is football. We have a pretty robust research enterprise at UGA. It's grown very significantly over the past several years. And as part of that growth, that obviously has to go hand in hand with in improvement and expansion of graduate education. And that's something that in the last few years has really become an emphasis of UGA. Probably the best indication of that is that the position of graduate dean was elevated to vice provost for graduate education. And so part of me is in the graduate school to help with that aspect of supporting graduate students, but I am also part of a online system implementation project and sort of the data nerd for the graduate school. So let me tell you something about the case study that we're going to discuss today. First of all, UGA has used symplectic elements for several years now as mainly a faculty activities profile repository. And so faculty are very active in the system and generate annual activity reports that are part of their evaluation. But early on, we decided that this would be a very useful profile also for graduate students. So every graduate student, when they enroll at the University of Georgia, also has a UGA Elements profile. And we work hard to try and encourage them to take advantage of it. My premise here is that if you get researchers and scholars active early on in recognizing the importance of this digital identification ecosystem, that they can take more advantage of it. They can start their profile from scratch, essentially, and really take advantage of the tools that are out there. And so that's why we decided having them in UGA Elements was a good idea. We have fully integrated UGA Elements with Orchid, and so there's a push and a pull of publication data between the two. And also Elements can put affiliation data into Orchid profiles as well. We encourage both faculty and graduate students to register with Orchid, and we do a reasonable amount of outreach, but it's mostly by aperiodic visits to departments and LibGuides and things like that. And we have a pretty robust portal at orchid.uga.edu to sort of introduce people to Orchid and why we think it's a useful tool. But when the Affiliation Manager came along, it occurred to me that this would be a real opportunity to do a much better outreach effort to our graduate students. At the same time, I'm part of the launch of an online recruiting application admission system at the grad school called Slate by a company called Technolutions. And this really gave us the additional tools that we needed to make this straightforward. So this obviously isn't as pretty as Paulo's slide, but this is the process flow for handling this effort. So we started by choosing a target set of graduate students, and we decided for various reasons that first year enrolled graduate students would be a good set. That involves about 2,200 students. The first thing you need to do is get the list of students and their email addresses, and Grad Slate was an easy place to do that for us. Obviously, everybody has a student information system that's probably equally good, but this was the easiest way for me to do it. And then I took the query results and used those to fill out the CSV that Paulo referenced to upload to Affiliations Manager. Then I downloaded the permission links that the Affiliation Manager creates and uploaded that CSV back to Grad Slate. And the reason for that is Grad Slate is also a perfectly functional CRM that allows doing, something like mail merge to put each of the links for each of those students into a separate email message and send that out to encourage them to grant the UGA affiliations with them. And these are obviously all educational affiliations. These are graduate students that are enrolled at the University of Georgia. And then we could monitor all that both in Grad Slate, because we can see that the email deliver, there's a lot of analytics there to make sure that your emails got to the right place, and the responses we could manage within the Affiliation Manager. So this is really a pretty straightforward process. Should be doable by any of you. And just to give you an example, and I have to say, we did this quite a while ago. Probably almost a year ago now, and it's conceivable that the formats and details are changed slightly from what they were then. But this is sort of what the upload CSV file has to look like. You have to have the set of email addresses. That's the critical thing. The type of affiliation, a title, we just called everybody a graduate student. That's what made sense for this. A start date, their matriculation term. And the organization name. The rest of all this is pretty much static data. And you can see in columns K and L, the organization identifier for UGA. Back then, we were using grid for the most part. If I did this again, this would be a ROAR identifier. And to be honest, I think this is one of the most important things about this process. This really does make sure that every one of your students in this case, but you could do this for faculty as well, are connected to a standardized identification of your organization. It certainly makes data reporting down the road a lot easier. So I just uploaded that CSV, and a day or so later, I downloaded the resulting permissions links, which is essentially what you see here. It's a CSV that has one column of emails and another column of links. And so those get put into a mail merge email and sent out to all the links, all the emails, and the link was there for them to click to authorize the affiliation. Having said that, these are all starting graduate students, so I don't imagine many of them to already have an Orchid ID. The nice thing about this is when they have that link, they can go register for the ID and accept the affiliation all at the same time. So it turned out to be pretty convenient for us. And then you can go to the Affiliation Manager and essentially watch as people click the links, sign up for Orchid IDs, and you can see that, for example, here's a record where somebody has accepted the affiliation. They have an Orchid ID, and then there are a few that are pending. Here's another one that's in Orchid, and you can see the information about their education in the. And you can go to any one of these individual profiles and see the affiliation data. Just to say, this is the email that we sent out to these people, and in retrospect, it's probably too much information, but I tried to give them some information about Orchid, provided the link to them right up front, and then if they're interested, you can read about why this is important, what else should they do, and that's the email that went out. By the way, I should say, let me back up 2 slides. In this CS feed, there is no name of the student. I don't know if that's different now, but that probably would have been useful because we can personalize these emails to each of the students. So what were the outcomes and what are the lessons I learned by doing this? Well, the response was not very good. I guess in retrospect, I'm not that surprised at this, but that was disappointing at the time. We didn't follow up with this, and the reason really was that these are starting graduate students, and to be honest, they get spammed by stuff all the time, and they're setting up they're starting their coursework, they're setting up their research efforts. It's probably the wrong time to hit them with something like this. So one of the lessons I learned was maybe we should be focusing on people who are a little farther along in their graduate careers. I'd also say this is not going to be, you're not going to get 100% response from something like this. There are a set of graduate students at a comprehensive university who really couldn't take advantage of an Orchid ID. Obviously, people in research fields and other scholarly fields could easily benefit from this, but there's a set of people in the fine arts and other areas that even though there's a way to use Orchid, it's a culture that's very different from culture of other disciplines. Third bullet here is that we should add an introduction to Orchid and to Elements because they're like I say, they're fully integrated with one another, to graduate student orientation materials. Since I wrote that bullet, we've resolved that problem. It is now part of our orientation for new graduate students. And like I said, we should focus on people once they've already settled in, and in maybe their second year, they've sort of recognized, wow, this could be really useful for keeping track of my outputs and activities and receiving credit where credit is due. And that's part of our outreach, how to sell that to graduate students. And that's the end of my presentation about the graduate student approach. I should say that we are equally interested and do just as much outreach in getting faculty to sign up for Orchid. I haven't used the affiliation management system for faculty yet, but it should be just as easy. Everybody has a PeopleSoft or some other HR system to get a hold of faculty emails, and Orchid has made it really easy to submit those lists, receive the links, and all you need is something like Constant Contact or some other CRM to send out the emails. And then it's easy to follow up. I should also say that there is an opportunity to ask Orchid to send reminders to the people who hadn't signed up. I chose not to do that simply because I thought it was a little more personal for that to come from the university rather from the Orchid organization. So I'll stop there and ask if there are any questions or comments.
Thank you, Bob. Sounds fantastic. So we do have some questions for you that was added to the chat. And then, of course, everyone feel free to ask additional questions if you like. You can either write it on the chat, and I think we may be able to unmute you as well if needed. But Bob, thank you for that example and for the use case for University of Georgia. It's really exciting to hear more about using it for graduate students. So we do have some questions for you. So I think one of the questions is, this was early on, is that why is Orchid not integrated with your ID management system?
Yeah, so that's a good question. We've had several discussions about going that route, and to be honest, the only thing that's held that up is that our central computing people are just already have a full plate, and this never rose to the priority of getting it done. But that's something that we're still working on.
I would think that that's fairly kind of common to a lot of organizations where priorities kind of differ, and maybe perhaps some priorities needs to be on top, of course. So thank you for that, Bob. So another question for you is that, so you have basically students coming in, some of them may already have research or may already have an Orchid ID. So how do you handle students coming in that do have an Orchid ID already?
So the link that gets sent out, I believe, gives students the possibility of using an existing Orchid ID to authorize the affiliation. So I think it works both ways. It's a way to establish, register for an Orchid ID, and a way to connect UGA to their existing profile.
Great, thanks, Rob. Yeah, exactly. That's that permission links is that you can use that to either connect your Orchid ID, like Bob said, or if you don't have an Orchid ID, your student or anyone else or employee, for example, could actually register for an Orchid ID as well using that permission link. So yeah, and registering for an Orchid ID only really takes about 30 seconds or less. So that should work. And actually, I kind of want to bring in that there was a question about whether an email address matters on which one you send it out to. So you may have an Orchid ID, for example, or an Orchid user that have an Orchid record already, but they use a different email address. And then let's say, for example, with UGA, so if Bob sent an Orchid record or a permission link to a person with Orchid user with an Orchid record, but to a different email address, they could still use that permission link and be able to connect their Orchid record into the Affiliation Manager.
And I should say that turns out to be really important for this set of users, because these are people just coming to the university. They come with their own personal email, usually a Gmail or something like that. And as soon as they get to the university, they get a UGA official email address, which they have to use. And so they will end up with a couple of different emails. And so it could get confusing, but Orchid profiles allow multiple email addresses. So that's not a problem.
Great. Thank you for that, Bob. Here's another question for you, actually. So do you think that the CSV method is better than using the Orchid affiliation built into elements, since you do have elements as well?
Yeah, that's a really good question. For this set of users, right at the beginning of their career, the usage of UGA elements is pretty spotty. We try hard. We've provided outreach, video tutorials, all sorts of things for showing people how to register for an Orchid through UGA, through UGA elements. And it is straightforward. It's easy to do. But I believe this actually captures more of the audience than that does. That's the only reason. Either one of these is, I have to say, pretty straightforward, as long as you have the tools to generate the list in the first place and then do the mail merge emailing.
Great. Do we have any other questions for Bob? We do have other questions as well that could probably address generally as well. Okay.
Okay, I'll stop.
All right. Great. Thank you, Bob. We will, I'm sure there will be other questions that come up. All right. So let's kind of go through some of the questions. I think one of the things that kind of asked early on is that do you have other recordings with faculty perspective in mind? So we do have other recordings. For the most part, we do record our community calls or our community showcase, for example. We definitely want to highlight that there's an Orchid for researchers. It's really specifically for researchers. And this one is sort of like guiding researchers how to fill out their Orchid record, how to maintain it, and how to basically have a good Orchid record that really kind of utilizes what's available there. So we do have that available as well. And we will have an upcoming webinar workshop on this as well fairly soon, and we will send out that information to everyone, as well as share it on our calendar of events and our listserv too. All right, and I think this one, the next question is, if we're low on keys, for example, let's say Orchid US members have 5 premium API keys, and say you've used all of them up already, or let's say you already have 4 and you want to use 1 for Affiliation Manager, and then so if you do that, you'll have 5. So the question is that, can you temporarily use one of the API key, and then maybe later on you need to basically kind of release that key and use it for something else? So the short answer for that is yes. So you could use an API key for the Affiliation Manager, and someday perhaps you no longer want to use it, you can take that and use that for something else. So that's definitely possible. Another thing that I will also like to bring up is that if you already use up 5 of your premium API keys, you are able to also purchase an additional API key if you like. If you want to do that, just let us know. Just email Sheila and me, and we will work on you on that one. All right, let's see. Can you assert affiliation in more than one capacity? Yes, definitely that is possible to add multiple affiliations to someone's Orchid record. So for example, you want to add an employment record and also an education record. So it could be like somebody works at university, but at the same time is also a graduate student. You can certainly do that. Right, let's see. Okay, so what else do we have here? Yeah, so the question about being a trusted organization, yeah, once the researcher kind of gives that information, authorize that permission link, the organization will become a trusted organization in that Orchid record or in that Orchid user. I think, Bob, we do have additional questions for you here on the chat as well. So his one is, what kind of permissions did you need at UGA in order to provide student data to the Affiliation Manager?
Yeah, so my work in the grad school involves the implementation of our online application system. And so I have access to all that data. There's nothing sensitive here other than the email addresses, and those are for the most part public. So it was just the agreement of the grad school to do this sort of outreach. That was all that was necessary. There's nothing sensitive here. There's no ID number or anything like that that's being transmitted. All it is, the most important thing is email address.
Great, thank you, Bob. All right, and I think we have a few. There's one where, what will happen when we are adding individual with existing Orchid to the system using an Affiliation Manager? So I think with this question, really, they can still connect. Basically, what happens is that when you do send out that permission link, they can connect their Orchid record to the organization using the Affiliation Manager permission link. So that should not it should work the same way. Even if, like we said earlier about, if you're using different emails, for example, that should not be an issue. Do we have any other questions that we have not answered, or do you have anything else in mind? Any other questions? Yes, there's a question about if a faculty member leaves, can you close the affiliation dates? Yes, so you can actually put an end date to that affiliation particular item on the affiliation record, or the employment record, for example. So you can actually go back to your affiliation manager system and either send an updated affiliation to that faculty. So you can add the end date or something, or any other updates that you want to do.
Yes, I
Sheila,
think there was.
go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. So there was another similar question, which was when someone leaves the institution, what happens? So if you've added an affiliation to somebody's Orchid record and then that person leaves the institution, that affiliation will stay on that person's Orchid record unless they delete it for some reason, or unless you delete it. But ideally, that will stay on their Orchid record, so that when they go to their next institution, they have an authoritative confirmation on their Orchid record that they used to work at your organization. And like Paolo said, what you'll need to do is go in and update the end date for that person's affiliation, and you can do that through the Affiliation Manager tool. It's really easy to just update information, and that will automatically get updated on the person's Orchid record too. So that's a great question. And I think there was one. Oh, we're getting all sorts of good questions. This is great. We're trying to keep track of all these and to put them in the notes later. But there was another question that was, what kind of permissions do you need in order to provide student data to the Affiliation Manager? I think that's actually another question for Bob specifically, unless we already covered that and I just missed it. Because Bob, you had said there's really not any like sensitive data that you need to add these affiliations. You just need their email address and their education information. So you didn't have to get any like special permission from other areas of campus, or did you?
No, I think we answered that question.
Okay.
The answer is that graduate student data, at least non-sensitive graduate student data, the grad school is the data steward for that. So it was just graduate school permission necessary, not registrar, for example, or other offices.
Great. Thanks for confirming that. Okay, let's see. Can a researcher revoke their update permissions at any time? And is the organization notified when that happens? So the first part of that question, yes. If a researcher has approved the connection to the Affiliation Manager, but then later they decide they don't want that connection anymore, they can log into their Orchid account, and there's basically like a trusted parties tab that they can go to and click on a little trash can to remove that connection. In terms of whether the institution receives a notice or an update if somebody revokes that connection, that I'm not sure. Brian, do you know the answer to that? Or will anything show up in the Affiliation Manager tool?
Yes, in the panel that Bob was showing, that you had one or two that said in Orchid, and then the Orchid record number, and then I believe the rest were pending. if somebody revoked access or deleted it, it would show up as such there. So yeah.
Okay, great.
Essentially, it's
Thanks for
just to
confirming.
yeah, I mean, that's a large part just to prevent you from, bugging the same person again with the same notification. So yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you. A few more questions coming in, and yes, thank you everyone for continuing to put those. Feel free to continue to put those in. The next one is, could the researcher update the affiliation end date themselves after they've made the organization a trusted party, for example, after they leave the organization? That's a great question, and the answer is no, the researcher cannot update that information themselves, because only the entity that added that information can make changes to it. So if you added their affiliation through the Affiliation Manager tool, that Affiliation Manager tool is the only way that that information could get updated. The researcher could delete that entry, or they could change the visibility of that entry, but they would not be able to make any changes to the information or the metadata in that entry. Researchers can only make changes to information that they added to their Orchid record themselves. So if there was some sort of glitch and their end date did not get updated, they could contact you and ask you to update it for them, but they would not be able to update it themselves. And then another question, in order to keep information up to date, we would need to load a new CSV file on a periodic basis. Does the reload overwrite what is there, or would the previous permission and info remain? Brian, you might want to take this one too, but I'm pretty sure that you can make updates. So go ahead, Brian, tell us.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. So essentially, this acts as like a update of existing records. So the most common case would be, the end date. I know one university that's used the Affiliation Manager, their plan is every few months to go back and update end dates and non-end dates and things like that. So I hope that helps.
Great. And then another question, if a user does not click on the email link, does that link expire? Will the user be prompted to go through authorization if they just log into their Orchid account through institutional login? So that's kind of two different things. Brian, does that link expire? Do you know?
No, the link is there. So if you want to do something different, it gets kind of messy. And Deborah, I'm sorry, I didn't answer. So the permission remains for when you update with the CSV. I hope that helps. Yeah, so the importance of these unique links is kind of to, I don't know, while they're there, while you have them on file in this sort of generate permission links thing to use those if you have those. Yeah. I hope that helps. So no expiry.
So the links don't expire? Okay.
Yep. Yep.
Okay, great. And then in terms of the question about will the user be prompted to go through authorization if they just log into Orchid using institutional login, they will not. So they have to actually go to the email and click the link to authorize the Affiliation Manager. At this time, if they just log into Orchid using their institutional credentials, they won't be, those systems kind of aren't connected, so they won't receive any kind of notification from doing that. Okay, let's see. Any questions that we may have missed?
So there was one about campuses that I'd be happy to chime in, and I think you and Paolo could provide some info too. So I think the question was, can you provide info, say in the case of UGA, about another campus besides Athens? And this kind of relates to the concept of an organization identifier that Bob briefly talked about. So Orchid is a individual identifier for people, but we use organization identifiers in this case, and those are managed by other organizations. So it's really important to kind of find out what your organization identifier is and make sure it looks the way you want. So for example, because all of the information will be associated with that identifier through the affiliation manager. So I don't know if you all want to add anything to that. Sheila, Paolo, Bob.
I was just going to say that it depends on how your organization is listed in GRID or ROAR or one of the organization identifier databases. And to be honest, I don't know whether different campuses of UGA have different organization IDs.
Yeah, it really depends. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Sheila. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say that's probably a good thing for everyone to kind of look into, because in many cases, you know, there will be one identifier for just University of Georgia overarching, and then, you know, you might have additional identifiers for each campus, and then, you know, it's kind of this tiered thing where there might even be separate identifiers for each department. It just kind of depends from one institution to the next, so people might want to look into that. And if you have questions at all, contact us. Here's our contact information. Email us at orchidus@lyrasis.org. If you are even remotely thinking about using the affiliation manager tool at your organization, contact us, because we can get on a call with you and kind of go through all of the details specific to your organization, answer any remaining questions that you might have, and we can help you get everything sorted so that you can start using this, because it's a great benefit to all of our Orchid US community member organizations, and we are here to help you make the most of it and get the most value from your Orchid membership. So please do not hesitate to contact us. And, you know, any additional questions that you might have, we're more than happy to work with you. Also, just wanted to mention very quickly at the end, for anyone that might have joined us late, unfortunately, our guest speaker from University of Pennsylvania was not able to make it today, but I do just want to say on their behalf, I checked their record before this, and they have actually updated about 1,500 faculty Orchid IDs with employment information. So it is definitely possible to use this tool for faculty as well. So keep that in mind. And again, if you have questions about using this, contact us for sure. Aside from that, stay tuned for the recording. We'll be sending the recording out probably within the next few days. And yeah, we look forward to hearing from you. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. Thank you, Bob, for sharing your case study with us. Thank you, Brian, for being here to represent Orchid. And thank you all for asking your questions and spending time with us today. I hope everyone has a great rest of your day.